Hey boys camp, it's Zissou. I'm going to tell you a little story. So about 5 years ago, I had an experience. I went to a youth winter retreat at a camp not too far away from OPC, where hundreds of kids gather to hang out, have fun, and do worship and that kind of deal. And it's crowded, it's loud. There's lots of kids, and that's not necessarily my thing. I need quiet. I need alone time to think. So I went on this retreat, and truthfully, I couldn't stand it. There's too much going on, and so the whole weekend I was miserable. I wasn't having a good time, and on the last night, it was a worship night, and during this time of worship, I started crying, and I think I was upset with God, and I was just questioning why He would have brought me to this place. And my question that night was just like, what am I doing here? God, what am I doing here? And I was crying during this worship thing, and I was really embarrassed. So I left the building where all these kids were, and I walked outside, and as the doors closed behind me, the sound just sort of shut off, and I was finally alone outside in the quiet. And I took a couple steps and just walked to the edge of the forest. And it was dark and quiet, and the snow was slowly coming down. And I stood there just asking that question. God, what am I doing here? Why am I here? I don't even know how long I was standing out there for, sort of crying, sort of just almost yelling to myself. But in this space of quietness, I heard God's voice, and He said, He called me by name, and He said, "Ben, I love you." And He said this over and over. And this wasn't a booming voice from heaven. It wasn't something I heard through my ears. It was a thought in my head, the quietest way one can hear something. And I tried to shut it out. I tried to cut these words of "Ben, I love you" off, because I thought it's just my head, it's just me. And I tried to cut it off, and I couldn't. I couldn't control my thoughts. And I heard "Ben, I love you, Ben, I love you" over and over again. So by this point, I'm bawling. My eyes are running with water. And then, of course, the worst thing happens. The worship night is over, and all the kids start pouring out of the building, walking right beside me as I stood there. And they're all wondering what I'm doing there, and I was so embarrassed. And one girl comes up to me, and she was a leader from the camp, and I didn't know her. She came up to me, and she said, "God is love, and God loves you, so you are loved by love." She walked off, and I never saw her again. But I stood there in that moment, half crying, half laughing, really confused, really happy that God had given me this answer that I wasn't expecting, and then reinforced it with this girl coming up and telling me this, something that I desperately needed to hear but didn't even know it. This is a moment that is changed my life forever, and meeting God in the quiet, just in the quiet of the woods, in the dark, in the snow. I couldn't have heard God's voice in a better place. So there's this guy in the Bible named Elijah, and one day he goes up on this mountain to hear from God. And he sits on this mountain, waiting to hear from God, and a windstorm blasts through, and it hits the rocks, and the rocks explode, and the trees are torn from their roots. But God is not there. He doesn't speak to Elijah through that. And then an earthquake comes, and it shakes the mountain, and God is still not in the earthquake. And then a fire comes, and this fire burns away everything on the mountain, and God is still not in the power of the fire. And then as Elijah is sitting there on the mountain, he hears a whisper. and it's God. And God comes to him through the quietness of a whisper. And God asks him, "What are you doing?" This story, just coming from the experience that I had 5 years ago, has meant a lot to me. Just understanding that through the busyness of life and all that us humans can get caught up with, sometimes we forget to pause, to stop, to go up on the mountain and just listen, to not expect a windstorm, an earthquake, or fire, but just to stop and listen and wait for God's voice. Because he's ready to come speak to you guys. You just need to stop, hold your breath, and listen.